Okay, so it's going to be October when you're seeing this, and the reason for that is this isn't exactly how I had planned on talking about this movie, because I had planned on doing like a whole book versus movie thing, what we've been doing with King. But after watching it, I don't really feel like I have a whole lot to say in regards to the book versus the movie until pretty much the end. Like, everything up to that point, more or less, is pretty right there in the book, minus a few characters and moments. So, I'm probably just gonna review the movie like normal. Regardless, one factor that I do plan on treating like when we would do a book versus movie is I'm just gonna go through the whole movie. Like, normally I wouldn't do that with just like a regular like new release review, but we're just gonna go through everything. So we're gonna have like all the spoilers and all the reveals and all like everything right to the end. So just be prepared for all the spoilers that are about to come if for some reason you haven't seen this yet. Going into this, it does come from somebody that's kind of been in this territory with Francis Lawrence, who is somebody that I always kind of thought was a pretty underrated director. And I think I mainly say that because I kind of love Water for Elephants. But obviously his Hunger Games movies, most people seem to love Constantine for whatever reason. So that's good for them also. And yeah, so to see him with this and to see how much real respect he's giving the material is really satisfying to see as somebody that's kind of been a fan of his going on, but he's a name that didn't really seem to stick out to a lot of people despite them having seen his stuff. And also the idea of sticking to it as this sort of timeless thing, because that's pretty much the way the book reads. And then here also, I don't really remember any particular indication of a time frame, so the fact that it could be at any given time in some dystopian future or whatever is really nice to keep up with that as far as like the theme goes. And the idea of opening with Garrity's letter of acceptance and kind of pulling you in that way, and almost like the movie's inviting you in. And I love the idea of thinking about the beginning of this movie through the eyes of somebody that doesn't know the concept. I'm assuming with like a lot of marketing and trailers and stuff like that, most people are going to know, but down the line, I'd really love to see people watching this for the first time not knowing what the concept is, because the movie kind of builds up to it in this really great way. Because we set up the emotional stakes immediately with, we have Garrity, who is Cooper Hoffman, who is amazing in this, and we'll talk more about that, but his mom is Judy Greer, and they do this really emotional goodbye, and just right there, Judy Greer has kind of been an expert at this point of taking like a really small role and being able to do so much with it and make such an impact. And it's like rarely, like earlier this year we talked about Eric LaRue, which is this incredible lead performance that she has. So she's able to do that also in just these little small doses in a lot of movies, and here especially, it just kind of feels like it sets the emotional stakes for everything going into it. On top of moments later when he meets everybody and we kind of see all the different personalities, and just right away everybody feels like they're a real person, like even if it's somebody that's just like in the background or somebody that has no dialogue or whatever, just people that might seem like really expendable, just sort of there's such a reality amongst everybody here, and obviously that's gonna add all of the emotional stakes also. And then we have this appearance of Mark Hamill, and he's one of those cases where it's like when you read the Major in the book, he might not be your first choice, especially older, current Mark Hamill, but the second you hear his voice, that just really deep, gruff, intimidating voice basically does all of the other work in regards to the intimidation factor of this character, which is amazing. And I love the way he says, practically to the camera, remember, anyone can win. And it's like he's addressing us, the audience, and saying, like, any one of these characters, like, if you get attached to somebody, or it feels like somebody's a main character, everybody's expendable. So going on that thing we were talking about, where I can't wait to see how people will react to this movie later if somebody should go into it without knowing the concept. So they refer to it, as they do in the book, as just getting your ticket when you're out of the walk. So, and after they explain that you get, the 3 warnings and then the ticket. And they leave it at that. And, like, I'm pretty sure if you don't know the setup, there's no indication of what getting your ticket is. So, when we see Barkovich, when he gets the rock in his shoe and has to stop and then retie his shoe and that whole thing, and the soldier comes up and puts the gun to his head, that, for these people, will be the reveal of what getting your ticket is. And then just when you think, just like they talk about in the book, and I think they do in the movie also, where it's this reality has to set in, because it's like, you know the concept, you've heard about it, you know it's been done several years before, but you always think like, oh, it's got to be fake in some way. Like, there's no way this is actually a real thing. And if audiences are coming in blind to the concept, they might think the same thing. So then that's when we get Curly, who any book reader knows is the first to go. And it's Roman Griffin Davis from Jojo Rabbit. And he was a really interesting choice, because he's one where it's like, oh, I can't wait to see what part he has, because he was, so amazing in Jojo Rabbit, and it's like, what else is he going to do as an actor? And so to kind of have you anticipate that he's going to be a major... Because he's also somebody that's addressed in the opening, like he's going to be a major player, because they comment on how young he looks. And then when he's the first to go down, and he can't get up, he loses the will to get up. And then when he hears his third warning, the way he just succumbs to it. And this is something that I really love, and I hate the way it was misinterpreted when it made headlines with what King wanted out of this movie. So when they come up to Curly and they count down and he's out, they give him his ticket by graphically blowing a whole part of his face off from behind. And that's all like in one shot too, where like you see the soldier come up, put the gun up, and then it blows part of his face off all at once. And so that tells you what you're going to be in for, to both us, the audience, and those characters. And the thing about what King said was that he wanted the violence to be really brutal and very much on screen, and wanted the audience to see these kids die. And of course, people interpreted that. It's pretty clear, so you could say idiots interpreted that as, wow, King's really bloodthirsty to see children die. That's fucking weird. What a fucking creep or whatever. And it's like, what King wanted was to make sure that people understood the reality of what's happening here. Because I think he used superhero movies as an example where, like, so many characters will die, like, just either off screen, or it's like somebody will get shot but nothing will happen, they'll just kind of fall over. And it's like, it basically sanitizes the violence, and it makes you, like, not really care much when it's happening. And so when you actually see it happening in full force right in your face, especially to people this young, and for the reason that it's happening, it's got to hit as hard as it possibly can and put you in the reality of this story. That was the intention, and that immediately comes through as soon as we see Roman Griffin Davis's death scene right here. And what I really loved especially, this is maybe one of my favorite opening moments in a movie, as far as I can remember at this moment. But I actually wanted to stand up and cheer the choice when I realized Curly gets his face blown off, and the reality sets in for Garrity, and we linger on this shot of Cooper Hoffman walking away, and like almost going into a panic attack as he realizes, oh my god, this is real, and that's what it looks like to see somebody die up close. To see that of somebody around his age group, and to see that happen, and the walk is real, and this could happen to him. It's all coming to him all at once as he's walking away from this, and the score is building and building. And I was not expecting in that moment, 20 minutes in, for the title to hit the screen. And that really... And we've seen, the delayed title plenty of times before. But for some reason, in this particular case, it just really blew me away. And I loved that choice so much, because it didn't really occur to me, oh, they haven't shown the title, maybe they won't show the title, I don't know. And for it to happen 20 minutes in like that is really spectacular. And just really set the tone. Not just for the movie itself, but how much I knew I was going to love the movie from that note as it went on. So, with that being the opening, we go and we meet, a lot of the other characters more up close as we continue. And obviously there's an amazing cast here. We have David Johnson from Alien Romulus, and Charlie Plummer, the guy that plays Stebbins, whose name I unfortunately can't remember, but I think he's like on the verge of a breakout. Like I think he's got a show also, so he's like in the process of breaking out right now, and he's really great also. And the way we see all these characters evolve quickly. Shout out to the actor playing Olsen as well, and when we see this evolution happen so quickly, and for actors so young especially, I know Mark Hamill especially was like really building up. You will not believe how good the young actors are in this, and that definitely holds up when you're watching it. And it's like the way things change so quickly, where it's like by the time the third death happens, their reactions have changed. There's the moment where one death happens, and Barkovich like screams how much of a rush it is when somebody dies, and you look around, like everybody around him is just sort of dead inside at that point. And so it's like I guess it's you could say it's the shock wearing off, but it's not. They don't become numb to the deaths as they happen. It's at some point it gets to that point when they're like, practically out of their minds, and it's kind of happening in the distance, and they don't see every one of them. But it's like these different ways. It just your entire mind just evolves into adapting in a sense in various different ways of processing all the things that are happening here. And it's a lot of work for actors to go through those emotions and do the different ones at the different times. And I especially like the way things change given circumstances. Like, not even just witnessing death, but also that anticipation of your own. So we have the moment where Garrity gets one warning, and it's like there's a little panic, and then there's a second warning that just kind of goes by. And then he gets, like, his third warning, and he suddenly snaps. Like, his whole mood just changes immediately when he's one step away from death, and then that turns into, like, he turns to McVrees and, like, goes off on him saying, like, you want me to get killed, and suddenly, like, everybody's out to get him, everybody wants him to die. And then the second he's kind of back out of it, and is eventually walking off those warnings, it's like he kind of comes back to where he is and is like, sorry about that and stuff like that. And just seeing those changes, and it all feels so real. Like, that's kind of the scariest thing in it, is just how, not just real it feels as far as, like, seeing death and all that, but just the way the personalities change and adapt. Just everything puts the story in, like, this own reality that somehow we can still recognize, despite being in this sort of undisclosed dystopian place. So all of that is done so well. As far as bringing some things over from the book that I wasn't sure how they would translate, one is, I guess just to put it right out there, people having to stop to shit being an issue. And when you read that in the book, it's actually these harrowing moments of not just the suspense of having to do it before you get killed, but there's a moment where Garrity does, and there's this whole humiliation factor, and, like, being watched by the world, and especially, like, girls his age and everything, and, like, laughing and talking about it, and it's this whole dilemma. And so when you think about that aspect, it's like, how are you going to do a scene where somebody has to stop to shit and not make it a comedic moment? Because that's just tends to be what not only movies tend to do with that, but how audiences would just naturally react to it. And so we do have a second moment that is kind of more played for the comedic factor. But this first one does play up more of, like, the suspense factor, and it's surprising how much it just doesn't feel comedic at all. And the fact that seems to be playing that way also, I think it's really impressive they were able to pull that off and still not really bring it out, even though there are moments that are, like, lighter and they'll, like, joke amongst themselves and stuff like that. And it's like, even when this whole thing is always looming, there's still, like, those light moments that can come through, which is really great. We'll talk more about those, but the second thing I wanted to talk about in regards to, I'm curious how that translates to the screen, is what they call dozing, where it's basically their brain goes to sleep and their body just kind of keeps moving on autopilot, and so they keep walking. They're able to get a little bit of sleep in while not stopping walking, let alone not going under the 3 miles an hour. So I was curious how they would do that, and my fear was that oh, they'll probably have like dream sequences or flashes of something or something. And the big fear that I really had with this movie was something the book does really well, which is not bringing us out of the moment. Like, whenever there's, like, I guess what you could call a flashback in the book, it's more of just, like, it's like Garrity's mind telling us about a memory rather than, like, he goes into the whole memory and we see every single detail. And so it's like, oh, in movie form, we're probably going to have some sort of flashback, and it's really, we have to stay in it if it's going to be as effective as it can possibly be. So it's like, please don't do flashback sequences. You have to stay in it. And so it's not really full-on sequences, it feels like. Like, we do get flashes of scenes from the past where Garrity's a child and his mom is singing. And they're quick enough, and they go in and out enough, that it's not too intrusive. But then there was a moment where I wasn't sure how I felt about the direction they were going, and then suddenly it all changed in regards to these moments of dozing and seeing things. So we get this flashback sequence that is completely new, not from the book, as far as I remember, where he has the memory of his father being confronted by the Major and being shot and killed in front of him. And so when I saw that, it was like, okay, I guess it's interesting and adds a different sort of feeling to Garrity doing this event that could get him killed that is run and controlled by the Major. So that puts an interesting twist on the dynamic that they have that past. And then, right after that, we get the moment where Garrity says, if I win, my one wish is going to be for a rifle so I can use it on the Major. And that's when it was like, okay, I see what you're doing now, and I think I'm on board with it. At first, I wasn't sure about some of those changes or where we were going with that, or adding that extra layer with him and the Major personally. But the second he said that, it's one of those things like The Mist or something. Why didn't King think of that? And I think there's a lot of cases where King feels the same way. That also gives it more of a destination, because it is a nice part of the concept that there is no finish line. It's just over when the last person is standing. To put just an extra thing on there that gives us something else to kind of go towards really does feel like it ups the stakes in this really new and interesting way. But before we go into that part also, talking about what we were earlier about how there's so many other characters and like faceless characters and nameless characters. Because I think there's 50 in the movie, there's 100 in the book, but still the 50 feels like a lot. And so when we get Deaths of Unknowns, it's like, how much weight is that going to carry? And I think the sequence that handled this the best, for sure, it's handled very well regardless. And it's like that idea of sometimes it goes in and out of, like, you'll hear one gunshot and it's like, oh, well, there's another gunshot. And then you'll hear another and it's like, oh god, things are getting closer. My odds just went up, but it also, the more people that die, the more closer death feels to me also, in this very conflicting way. So there's that whole thing, but this sequence when they have to go up the hill, I really love, because when they go up the hill in the book, the way King describes like the exhaustion and the cramps and the pains and all of that, it's just something in itself. But then to add in what this scene does, where people start dropping left and right, there's just this full-on pandemonium as it goes on, as people are dying around them. It's anger, it's frustration, it's panic, it's like, and then that's just that on top of the gunshots themselves and the warnings being yelled at everybody, and it's just this total chaotic war zone for this particular sequence of just going up the hill. And it's insane. That's an incredible sequence. And then the aftermath of some of that, where it's, they kind of just throw it in there real quick when Harkness breaks his ankle. And I guess at that rate, you kind of think, oh, we lost Harkness in the mess. When he's still walking the next morning and his ankle is just destroyed, and he's just hobbling along the best he can. And for a character that had a lot of personality, and then to see this character so helpless, is when it really kind of starts to, because there's like we were talking about the emotions that the characters go through, and then we go through as an audience, where it's like first there's the shock of it, and then it's like, okay, this is the concept, I'm in it, and then like the sadness of it really starts to come in. I mean, there's always, the sadness is probably always in there somewhere, but there's so much big emotions going on. Some emotions can probably hide more than others, but the more we start to narrow things down and the more brutal it gets, the more sad it's going to get also. And the tragedy of when Harkness gets his ticket, and the fact that like kids were watching, and like they tried desperately to get the kids to look away, but it's just this, that's the spectacle of it. That is another thing. Maybe this is more book versus movie than I thought. So it's the idea of like having all the spectators and it being like this whole big spectacle of a thing. I do like the way that they, in the movie, that's something that's more kind of discussed, like it's something that's clearly happening, but they're not always wrapped up in it, because there's more like rules, and there's like an only local sort of gathering thing, but for the most part it feels pretty abandoned and they're by themselves. So that's a kind of a nice way to make it more, I guess, these personal moments kind of stay more confined that way, and kind of feel like there are moments without things being too drowned out and too much focus being put on the whole spectacle aspect of it. Because that's stuff that we know, and it's just kind of going to be in the back of our minds, and it's like, it doesn't really necessarily need to be like front and center to really drive home the spectacle aspect, so I really like that choice also. But I was talking about before how we do find like more light and upbeat moments, like the "fuck the long walk" chant and the guy playing the radio. It's the moment when Garrity and McVrees are talking, and Garrity like trips and gets a warning, and it's like, even though it's a warning and that puts you another step closer to death, at this moment it's just like a, oh, oops, and they kind of laugh it off, that he got an accidental warning. And so that's another thing also that just kind of puts you so much in the world. It's like, it's a moment that feels so real. Like that's just a moment that would totally happen, especially if you had, made such a close friend by this point. Those are the kind of small moments there would be, even in these moments of danger. But then there's always going to be things where it's like, the higher, the happier moment and the lighter moment, the more and harder it's going to come crashing down. I mean, starting smaller after the "fuck the long walk" chant and everybody's spirits kind of come back up, then it just abruptly cuts to the rain, is one thing. But then, obviously, as it goes on, and the fact that now it's going to be mostly characters we know and personalities we know, and we've come to get to know, and the other characters have started to form a bond with. So it's going to feel more brutal when these characters get killed, and sometimes the movie takes that up and makes sure that it's more brutal in every sense. So we have, the legs getting run over, and we have, there's the moment when the guy with the radio intentionally goes out of bounds and gets shot. And it's like the fact that the radio scene where he kind of helped really lift up the spirits during that chant really wasn't that long ago, and to see him crack so soon and decide to just end it is really jarring in this really sad and depressing way. But then there's the moments, which is a moment from the book, where they shoot Olsen and decide to, because he made this big attempt to sort of go out with a bang or sort of try to take over or whatever, and it just falls on its face, they decide to shoot him and just let him bleed out instead of ending it quickly to make an example of him. And that's, there's moments here like these, moments like this that go harder, where it's like, you would think in a book, typically the case in the book is that something will read more brutal, and then the movie is either a watered-down version of those moments, or it's just so brutal that the movie can't live up to what the text says. And I kind of feel like this might be the reverse, where the book is a very harrowing experience, but after seeing this play out, especially through the performances of the actors and how brutally violent it can get, it does feel like it was easier as text. And, like, when you're actually seeing it, this is, like, a rare case where the movie is kind of able to one-up the book on just how brutal it can be and how much more reactionary it can make you to what you're seeing. And it's like, even go beyond your imagination, because it's like, a lot of things that happen here are kind of unimaginable. And so to see them actually playing out for real kind of takes it a step above. We have completely taken the character of Scram out of the book, the guy that had the wife and got, like, really sick as he was going. And it's like, just the descriptions of that are just horrific. And so, having taken him out, they've decided to make Olsen the married one, which, I don't know, it does feel like a bit of a stretch, but the fact that he went out so tragically, I guess, does add that other layer to it. But another interesting choice that they made was to have Stebbins be the one that got sick. Because the Stebbins in the book, like, his whole thing is that he's completely unstoppable. And it's like he's a machine. And so to make him the one that actually gets sick and then has to deal with that for the remainder of the time and kind of make him a reverse character of what he is in the book is a really interesting choice. What I found interesting, too, now that we're talking about these characters, and speaking of characters like Scram, I feel like the movie handled it well as far as who's in the movie and who they took out, because there are characters that you would get attached to in the book that didn't make it here, or characters that, like, left an impact, like Percy. And it's like the idea of, like, Percy's mom, like, always showing up to look for him, and then the way, like, the poetic way he goes out, where they say he looks like a work of art as he's dying, and to take him out completely, it's like, you would think these characters would be, like, really noticeably missing after you've read the book, but I found at the end of the movie that it wasn't really occurring to me until after the fact, which characters didn't make it or which characters got their personality traits kind of divided. But I think that's pretty impressive to just kind of take that out of your mind and get you so invested in the characters that we have here that it's only kind of an afterthought of who was taken out. So that's a really good way to show how great of an adaptation this is. And then we have the moment when he eventually sees Judy Greer after they get to his town. And I did like the change here where it's because he has a girlfriend in the book that he's, like, really fixated on. And that's what he's thinking about. And then the moment where he feels kind of guilty because when he goes to his girlfriend and has the moment, and then he has to quickly get away. And it's like he has this moment in retrospect of, oh, I feel guilty that I didn't give my mom more time, or didn't, like, even really acknowledge that she was there. So to make it solely his mom is definitely a really nice, big, emotional choice, and really adds a lot of weight, especially giving him the backstory now with his dad, and the fact that that's something that both of them would have gone through is the reason he's doing this in the first place. And so that was a really effective choice. And the idea of taking McFreeze's girlfriend out of the equation, or ex-girlfriend out of the equation, where it's the story about his scar. And I did like, because it feels like it kind of goes in this weird sort of random direction when McFreeze gives his backstory in the book. So I like the one in the movie a lot better, and then his, like, sort of choose love speech. So that was kind of real, and obviously, you know, all the praise to David Johnson here, of course. And then, as it went on further, while it was, like, there's a lot of emotions going on, and you get really hit hard by a lot of things, I don't know if it was just that after everything else we'd been through or what, but when the deaths started happening, as we were getting closer to the end, I found myself getting more, like, actually emotional. Like, Parker's death, like, really got to me, and, like, when his decision to take himself out after that, like, that whole sequence is really heart-wrenching and gut-wrenching. And then Art's death, which is from the book where he says, just do me one favor and don't watch me. I think he adds another one and says, like, you know, give this to my grandma or something. But it's the when I die, just don't watch thing that even book or movie hits in this really big way. And then as we go forward and we get to our big ending change, which is, well, we can go into a whole thing here. So what I like first of all is that there, like King's reputation, I feel like sometimes it's kind of blown out of proportion, but King does more or less have a proper reputation for his endings kind of falling off. And I do think The Long Walk is one of those, where when we get to this point where we're at in the movie by this point, a lot of the things that happen in the book do feel pretty anticlimactic. Starting with De Vries basically sacrificing himself, and then it's down to Garrity and Stebbins, and then they're walking, and then Stebbins reveals the twist about himself being the Major's son, but then he just kind of has, as far as I remember it, he has just like a manic moment where he just kind of stops and dies, just like suddenly. Whether it's like being worked up by the whole thing or whatever, I don't quite remember, but I just remember that Stebbins' death is just really sort of random and sudden in the book, leaving Garrity as the winner. So obviously the movie took a completely different path, which is good, because it does start with I like the fact that because Stebbins kind of stays like the main antagonistic character apart from the Major in the book, until he just literally stops dead. So I like the turnaround with Stebbins, where it's like when he's telling the twist and he's making the rabbit analogy, he's basically making a guilt-filled confession and then takes himself out, decides to stop. And that's a really great send-off for that character, and definitely gives him more layers. And then finishing with Garrity and McVries, which you could say is, because when you're reading the book, you kind of start to suspect it's going to be Garrity and McVries, so I guess you could say it's a bit of a predictable route to end with the two of them, but I do think, now that we've seen the way it plays out in the book, where McVries isn't one of the last two, it does feel like a much better choice here, especially with the choices that are made, when we kind of yo-yo the audience here. But usually I would say that's a cheap thing or a manipulative thing, but I feel like the way they set us up for one thing and take us in another way here is actually so well done, because it works so well emotionally. It doesn't feel like we're being manipulated. It feels like we are genuinely reaching a place in our emotions that are earned when we get to this point where McVries does what he does in the book, and he says, like, you know, I'm gonna let you win. Like, I'm just gonna stay here and let it happen. And Garrity convinces him to continue on, and then just as Garrity gets through to him and they're going to walk off, that moment, that heart-dropping moment, when Garrity, like, kind of gives him a little push on the shoulder and stays, is so well done. It's so tragic. It's so perfect for, like, you could say, I've heard arguments that McVries is, like, the protagonist of the movie, but Garrity's, like, real heroic moment here. It also hits a lot harder even than McVries' moment does, the similar one in the book, I think, especially with this background that we have, where we've seen, because I think it's an addition to the movie also that the Major kills the last person. I don't think that's a book thing that I remember correctly, if I remember correctly. So, the fact that we are going to see history repeat itself, and the way Garrity watched the Major shoot his father is now about to happen to him by the same person. And when you've seen enough movies that have just enough of a certain kind of ending, your mind is thinking, there's no way the Major's going to actually kill. There's going to be some intervention here. There is no way, after everything we've set up, that Garrity is going to suffer the exact same fate as his father. Because that's just not what happens. Like, that, like, in stories, like, that's the part where you change history or you correct history. And so, when the Major successfully kills Garrity with a point-blank range shot to the head, it's fucking crazy. But feels like it's really coming to its destination. Like, this isn't a just to throw the audience off or just for shock value. This is like a real emotional payoff, just not in the positive sense. We're used to emotional payoffs as they were. It's absolutely a payoff, just one that we wished it didn't have to be. And that's kind of beautiful. And then the whole idea of McVree's fulfilling the wish of wishing for the rifle to kill the Major. And I love that there's actually just enough, because you get to a point now where, again, you have other endings in mind, and you think, like, there's just enough of a pause where McVree's might back down. And there's just enough of just in general, the feelings here, it's like, it did feel like there was an actual, because usually it's kind of false anticipation or false suspense, where it's like, we know he's going to do it. This is the part where they just kind of fake us out a little bit, and then that's the thing we're expecting. But at least to me, and somebody that typically hates that fucking trope, I was convinced that there was a moment here that maybe McVree's wasn't going to do it. Especially since McVree's would have never been this character otherwise. Like, he was the character that wouldn't break in order to do something like this. So when he actually does it, and says that it's for Ray specifically, there's a lot going on, because there is a satisfaction watching the Major go down after he pulls the trigger, for sure. Like, there's been moments in other movies where, like, a character gets revenge and it's like, oh god, this is so bad for everybody, and this is just going to be this chain reaction of horrible things happening, and you don't have the satisfaction. But no, that there is that moment of, like, what does this mean now, and what does this mean for McVree's especially? But even while we have those moments of doubt that this is a totally, positive sort of note to go out on, it's obviously already bittersweet given everything else. But as far as, like, that sort of revenge satisfaction feeling, but yeah, the fact that that moment of satisfaction is in there when that happens, despite everything else, that we can just kind of all feel it all at the same time. Like, there's no real, oh, I can't feel this because I feel all these other things. All the emotions are here, and that's our last shot. It's yeah. What it all boils down to, I guess, is that this is, like, top of the year material, and it's one of those movies that was kind of getting hyped up as, like, critics and screenings were happening. And it was getting built up that it was a really good adaptation, and it's a great year for King adaptations, with The Life of Chuck also being a top movie of the year, and then quality wise, and then The Monkey was really fun, and we've still got The Running Man, and it's a really great year to be a King fan and a movie fan. So this is, yeah, this really exceeded expectations in a way. Like, it's a really great book, and it was destined to be at least a really good movie, but that you could make the changes that you make and make what could have been a really good movie into a really great movie is, yeah, as a King fan and just a movie fan, these are the kind of movies that you're really grateful for. So that's how I feel about this. I really love this movie. So I guess I can leave that at that. I don't know if I praised Cooper Hoffman enough. I was kind of setting up that I was going to do that, but yeah, he was somebody where I wasn't sure with Licorice Pizza, because I wasn't real sure how I felt about that character, so I didn't know for a bit how I felt about him as an actor. And then I did really like him in Saturday Night, and then here it's like, I get it. I get the Cooper Hoffman thing, finally. So, just anything, like, just from that look alone, after Curly's death into the title, that was the moment where I was like, before even the rest of the movie happened, where he's incredible the whole time, it's like, just in that moment, before the title came up, I was like, I get the Cooper Hoffman thing now. And it sounds like he's going to really do a fantastic job of, as far as, like, Dad's shadow goes and stuff like that. This is like a whole other legacy that's brewing that'll be a great sort of continuation of that, but also be his own thing for sure, is the vibe I'm getting. So Can't wait to see what else he does. I know everybody's been saying that since Licorice Pizza. I'm just now getting on that train, but I'm very, very happy to be on that train now. So that's how I feel about all this. So we've got a lot of other stuff going on. We've got more King stuff and more of the shootings out of order. I gotta think of what's happened. The VHS stuff and the Poe stuff should be what you just started if you're going through everything. So a lot more of all that stuff and more stuff after that and everything in between. So until all of that, I think that's it.